Hey, maybe they shared the studio, right? Like, you know how you bunk with a roommate or something?
Yeah, it's like a WeWork office, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
just 30 MMOs all being made in one studio. Yeah,
I
that would be more likely, to be honest.
Is the MMORPG genre stagnating? Is it growing? Is it dying? I sat down with a good friend of mine today, Callum Upton, and we talked for roughly almost 2 hours about the state of the genre, the future of the genre, indie games, MMOs, mobile MMOs, you name it, it was probably discussed. This video is going to be over an hour long, so I urge you to go ahead and get something to snack on. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so with this video, I just want to go over, since you're well-versed in indie MMOs, you're probably the most well-versed, I think, out of all the MMO creators in the indie scene.
Yeah.
Typically, you know, the majority of us either cover new upcoming games, games that already exist, but none of us really touch on the indie scene because, I mean, let's be honest, they haven't really accomplished all that much in recent years.
No, it's a bit of a dumpster fire. Bit of a dumpster fire with the indie scene, yeah.
Yeah, like, it's not to say that there isn't potential there, but, you know, there's also a lot of instances, like, I don't know if you're around at the beginning when Oath was created, then there's the instance with Chronicles of Illyria and so many different MMO scams, Kickstarter scams. Like, it isn't a good look for the indie scene.
No, I definitely agree with that. I've followed most of these. Chronicles of Illyria, I've followed more than anything. I've not covered it that much because it's kind of been my guilty pleasure to sit back and just watch it fall apart at the seams. But no, I'd say in the last 10 years, I think you're right. It's been rife with like scam MMOs and just not very well thought out MMOs. I think a lot of the times the intentions are good, but they just kind of don't look at the bigger picture and think, okay, can we actually do the things that we're planning on doing, you know? So yeah, it's not been great.
And there's this warped, I think, perception of what indie MMOs are, because when you tell someone, like, what do you think an indie MMO is? They're like, you know, it's like this 1 or 2 man team that are working out of their parents' basement or something, creating something in like RPG Maker or something like that. You know, like the most basic game conceivable. And in some instances, it's true. I've covered some MMOs that launched onto Steam in the last 6-9 months that have all been very basic and that really don't offer much. They actually genuinely look like they were made in RPG Maker. And they all function the same way. There is no real inspiration. There's nothing really that sets it apart from any other game. But then you do have other games that are coming, like, I don't know if you follow Core Punk. There's Ashes of Creation.
I've heard of it. I've heard of Core Punk. I've been following Ashes of Creation. But I don't know too much about Core Punk, actually. I just know of the name.
It's a team with dozens of programmers on it. They released, I think, a trailer years ago. They're holding, I think, an early access this December. And
Okay.
it's probably one of the indie MMOs that I think had the most potential, and it's one of the MMOs that I've been really following. But then there's like Scars of Honor, there's Fractured Online.
Yeah.
So there are some genuine MMOs out there that are actually forming into something that is playable and that does feel genuinely like an MMO.
That's something really interesting. I think we've gone full circle with the kind of indie MMO. I mean, there was a point about 6 years ago where if I heard the words indie and MMO in a sentence, I'd have like an aneurysm because people don't understand that those two things don't really go together unless what we think of as an actual indie MMO isn't very indie. Usually they've got some good funding behind them from the get-go. They've got some good experience in development, and this is the important one, network engineering. This is the bit that I think a lot of indie MMOs just completely lose sight of. That it's almost like if you were to tell someone, I'm designing a car, and you say to me, oh, what engine has it got, and you know what brakes are you putting on it? I'm like, no, don't worry about that. It's going to have a spoiler, I'm putting some really cool headlights on it, and it's going to have Lambo suicide doors, right? And you're there as a car person, like, yeah, no, that's cool and all, but like the bare bones that it's built upon, like, what is that? And that is the networking in MMOs. A lot of people say things. I've heard some very silly things, such as, "Oh, we're just going to use Unreal Engine's native networking." No, you're not. That falls apart after about 100 players on a game session. You need to actually make your own, and the fact that a lot of indie MMOs don't realize that just shows that a lot of them they're not even game developers in the first place, a lot of them, right? They're relying on things like buzzwords that they've heard, and they think, well, I can do that. Fortnite's got 100 people running around shooting. Why can't I do that with like 1,000? And it's very deceptive. But then again, a lot of the potential audience, the player base, they don't know this either. And honestly, they're not supposed to know this. You can't expect them to know much about networking and kind of fact check these small MMOs. And I think that's where a lot of this has kind of fallen apart, is they show off the flashy things that most gamers can look at and be like, oh, that's really cool. They've got all these races. They've got all these zones planned out that are going to go into the game. And they've got a real day-night cycle with weather that changes in real time. That's really cool. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't have the bare bones of an actual, networking solution to make all of that happen. So they never realized that a lot of those are never going to be. So like I say, 6 years ago, if you'd have said to me indie MMO in the same sentence, absolute aneurysm. But recently, we're seeing a lot of companies that have been funded ahead of time with a decent amount of money and have a working prototype of their kind of like network and multiplayer architecture, which, like I say, is the absolute foundations of the MMO. And that's really impressive to see. So we're starting to see MMOs now that are indie MMOs in the actual sense of the word, but they have what it they have what it takes to go further. So have you noticed that more with recent like indie MMOs?
How they actually have a foundation, how they actually have a game rather than an idea. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
I first noticed this starting to crop up with a game that I know is a touchy subject for a lot of people, Titan Reach.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I actually had the pleasure of chatting to Unraveled, the guy who was running the whole, everything around Titan Reach. He ran the whole project. Obviously, things didn't go quite to plan after the funding and, like the early access and stuff. But those guys had the right idea up until that point. Get a strong demo of an indie MMO. It was basically a kind of a modernized RuneScape clone, which sounds like I'm, hitting on it a bit, but it's cool. That was a really good idea. Proof of concept came out. You could actually playtest it on, when they launched the Kickstarter, which was basically unheard of at the time. Most of it was, grand ideas from people you've never heard of. Like, we're making an MMO. It's going to be the best MMO you could ever think of. It's going to have everything you want in it. And it never happened. But this was different because you got the game to play before you even decided to back it. And this kind of, I think, reinvigorated the passion behind indie MMOs and the idea that, no, you can have a small team that do have the knowledge and are able to do what they are saying they're going to do. It's just a shame it didn't quite end the same way it started with that. But I think it's reinvigorated the indie scene for MMOs, definitely.
Hey, we have a new Titan Reach. I think another studio bought it, or another group bought the rights to it. And...
Yes, I covered this. They actually didn't.
Oh, really?
So this is how I ended up talking to Unraveled. The game wanted to use their title, which is the important thing. And this game had reached out to them and said, hey, can we use your name? And they were like, yeah, you can use the name. That's fine. So then, instead of just using the name, they decided we're going to rip all the marketing material, the logo, everything, which we weren't promised, and just advertise us as the new Titan Reach. And I even reached out to the guys who had done this. I was like, do you understand the kind of negative connotation that comes with what you're trying to claim? I was like, it's not as big of a flex as you think it is. Like, it's really not. And I don't think they even knew much about the game they were trying to steal the entire branding around, because they very quickly stopped. But yeah, that game was nothing to do with it. It was more of it looked like a bit of a New World clone. The one they were trying to make, guns and rifles and stuff. It was really strange. The whole situation was one of those where I was bouncing back between the two people and I was like, none of the stories here are adding up, but it's just confusing.
I just remember Massively OP was reporting on it, saying that they purchased the rights to it, and then after purchasing rights to it, the original devs were like, oh no, we didn't give them rights. There was just this big drama between both sides, and I don't think
they gave them the domain name. Domain name and email domain, I believe, was all that they had in writing said you can have. Like, if you want that name, that's cool, doesn't matter. But I remember looking through the new company's website for this, and absolutely howling with laughter for like half an hour. You'd go through and they'd be showing an office tour, which is still images of their office. But it was all Adobe stock photos where they had just drop shadow plonked a logo over the Adobe logo. So they'd not even paid for the stock footage. They'd just put their logo over the watermark to make it look like it was this standout thing on the wall. But all the shadowing was like the opposite of what it should be. It was really obvious. And it's one of those things where it's like, if you don't have an office, don't lie about having an office. Because that just makes the situation worse. Like, if you're working remote with 4 guys out of your mom's basements, cool. That's how most games start. But don't make it out to be something it's not, where you've got like this high-rise office, which, funny enough, 30 other companies seem to have the exact same office with different logos in place. It just doesn't, it's not a good look, right? It's, if you're lying about something really basic like that, what else are you lying about? And that's when people start digging into it and pulling up all this information, such as like a team of 30 people, where 25 of them are just, again, stock images. It's all good fun. It's all good fun.
Hey, maybe they shared the studio, right? Like, you know how you bunk with a roommate or something?
Yeah, it's like a WeWork office, but it's just 30 MMOs all being made in one studio. Yeah, that would be more likely, to be honest.
So are you looking at any indie MMOs now? Like, are there any indie MMOs in the immediate future that you think are going to release or that you're holding out for?
Yeah, so one in particular, the one that you mentioned earlier, Scars of Honor, is one. It's a company that I've been working with for quite a while, doing a bit of consulting for them, just generally helping them decide on what's a good decision, like what do I think is a fair business model, and just lending them advice. That you know that they flew me out over to Bulgaria, where they're stationed, to again basically consult and just interview them. And it was a kind of pull no punches. You know, nothing's off limits. You can go around, look at whatever you want, everything behind the scenes, code and everything. Because they basically said to me, they were like, a lot of people think that we're a scam, and we can't really prove that we're not, beyond what what we're actually able to show off. The game's already out for you to play test and whatever. Don't know what else to do. And they're like, we'll invite you over and just have a look around. Like I say, nothing was off limits. And when they asked me this, they didn't realize that I'd been following them for like a year prior anyway, which was really interesting because there were all these things that I kind of already knew from a faraway perspective about this game, that I'd been, looking into it, because a few people had said, hey, look into this game and check it out. And again, I'd already been looking into it. These guys are a team that are doing stuff right. Like I say, they've sorted out their networking solution. In fact, they spent three and a half years before they even announced the game working on just the networking behind the scenes. And it's really impressive. And there's something that if you're not a game developer, you don't really know. You don't really know this about networking, and I think I mentioned this to you not that long ago. Most games hit what you call like the 4 to 6 month slump, where player numbers are down, quite low, and these MMOs have used a third-party networking solution that they are paying, per month per user. And you don't really get the kind of bulk savings unless you've got like 60, 70, 80,000 players and above, right? You get like a bulk discount on all of these players. So when most games hit this slump, they can't afford to run anymore. And that's when it turns to, right, microtransactions. What can we do with the microtransactions? What can we sell to our players? And you generally find that the games never recover from that. And they just kind of die out because they require that money to pay these networking fees. Well, look at the successful games. World of Warcraft, RuneScape, and there's plenty more, I'm sure. They've all made their own networking solutions or have bought them outright from another company that did make them, meaning they don't have rolling costs. Once they own it, they own it. And that's something that Scars of Honor have done that I am super impressed with, because they're not really going to get caught in that slump when, player numbers die down, which they always do after a release. Like, you've covered so many MMOs that it's just a fact. They go up on launch with marketing, slowly come down in, the 4 to 6 month period. And that's when they start making radical decisions to try and bring more money in, because they have to, right, to cover these costs. They're one of the MMOs that I think are going to succeed, like, massively, due to something as simple as that. They put the thought in ahead of time, and they've kind of future-proofed their business model, which I think is quite impressive.
So regarding servers, an issue that a lot of MMOs also have is that they over or undershoot, and they don't anticipate the influx of traffic. Yeah. So as an example here, with Tower Fantasy, with New World, with Lost Ark, when these games launched, they launched with the expectation of, I don't know, maybe like a couple 100,000 players, and they get hit with millions of people concurrently trying to log in, and then they expand, they release new servers, and within a month, 2/3 of the game is already gone. You know, there's been a mass exodus
merging
of
servers and everything.
Yep, that is a very serious issue that a lot of companies run into. And then you have the issue where you're either playing on a dead server, your server's getting shut down, or the server's getting merged into another server. You think that's
a
something...
tricky one, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Like, I remember seeing this with New World, and there was a lot of problems that people had pointed out, like before the game had even launched, that New World ran into when the game started to scale down and they had to start, merging servers. And that was, if somebody controls an area, let's just say Area A in Server 1, and a different faction control Area A in Server 2, who controls it when we merge it?
See, in Perfect World, which is an MMO that released back in 2008, how they handled it back there, because there were territory wars in Perfect World, which were big PvP battles. So in Perfect World, when they merged servers, what they did was they reset the territory map, and then it had people start from scratch. So then all the territories would be, all the guilds would be vying for each respective territory, and that made it fair. So there was no, like singular entity that controlled the majority of the map or anything like that.
Yeah, so that's a good example, because I never played Perfect World, but I had lots of friends who did back in the when it was popular.
Relevant, yeah.
Back when it was relevant. I was trying to avoid saying that, but I guess it's fair. And I think the key difference is, in New World, you had pay for convenience, right? And a lot of guilds, the bigger ones, were requiring you to be at least using these pay for convenience options for fast travels, for whatever it may be, whatever flavor of the month convenience was. That, when you bring like an actual monetary value into that, that becomes really tricky to justify resetting the territory for factions and guilds, because actual money was put into gaining control of that. It was a tactical advantage that was bought. If that gets taken away from you, there is a justification there. Well, why? Why are you allowed to take away something that we paid actual money towards gaining? And I think this is something that a lot of MMOs, modern ones at least, have really gotten themselves kind of bogged down and entrenched in, which is real money is being put into them, and it's valued a lot more in-game than it used to be. And there's no real right way to handle that situation, I don't think.
Yeah, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're going to upset one of the two sides. But then at the same time, that shouldn't really necessarily be a thing anyway. There should really be like any kind of intrinsic value on anything like that can change the game on that kind of level, like something that allows for you to hold or assert dominance over a part of a map or a feature, especially when it's something as competitive as PvP.
Yeah, I think it's also a lot to do with the way MMOs have kind of just changed over the years, right? I know nobody likes the microtransaction conversation. It's something we all like universally hate, and some people try and justify it to a certain end and be like, well, that's okay for this. And it's kind of like, for most people, they've got their line that they try not to cross with microtransactions. They're like, everything's okay up to this point, and then beyond that, it's too much. But I think the way we perceive MMOs now has completely changed from 10, 15 years ago. When people say things like, oh, indie MMOs, a lot of people think of just old school MMOs, right? And a lot of people think of just low budget MMOs with modern game engines. And that's been really interesting to watch, because something that I found super interesting was the debate around bringing back like old school RuneScape. When they went to RuneScape 3, messed it all up, and they were like, no, you're looking at this through like rose-tinted glasses. You don't actually want that. That's just nostalgia. The players finally get it, and suddenly it's more popular than the main game. Like, everyone's just jumping ship to the older game without the microtransactions, and it's like, Jagex are sat there thinking, what do we do? Because clearly players don't want to be over-monetized, so they're going to the game with less monetization that they can just enjoy. They can get lost in this fantasy world that has no real ties to the real world, like monetary value and whatnot. And then it happens with World of Warcraft, and what was it, WoW Classic? The whole meme. You think you do, but you don't. And then it comes out, and again, people are leaving like mass exodus from the main game to the old school version. And I don't think the problem that people are having is nostalgia for that specific game. I think they're having nostalgia for a time where you were kind of letting yourself live in this fantasy world that is just completely separate from the real world, you know? And you can't really do that anymore because microtransactions are just like thrown in front of you in every MMO now. I used an example in an interview that I did with a game studio a while back about when I used to play RuneScape back when I was in starting high school. My family didn't have very much money at all. They just about, would allow me to have membership on old school RuneScape when it was not old school RuneScape, but, RuneScape back in the day. And I could be playing with absolutely everyone out of my high school. People whose dads quite do literally work for Microsoft and stuff, they're very well off. But as soon as you step into this fantasy MMO world, everyone's on an even footing. Like, it doesn't matter whether your dad works for Microsoft or your mom can just about scrape $5 for you to play RuneScape on the weekends. I think a lot of people were drawn to it because of how equal. There was no inequality in MMOs back in the day. Sure, there were like underground markets buying and selling gold, but it wasn't like rubbed in your face by the companies beyond the actual pay-to-play model. And I think that's changed so much now that the original audience have just kind of phased out of MMOs over the years. I've at least noticed it with close friends that I played with back in the day. Is that something that you've felt or noticed?
The majority of people that I know that played MMOs have kind of actually stopped. Interestingly enough, like in the last few years, it's been like a gradual build up to a point where they've all just kind of gone, you know what? I've been playing Final Fantasy 14 for like 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. I go back to WoW once a year, do the stuff there, get bored, leave WoW. Yeah. Maybe I'll go back to RuneScape if they're a RuneScape player. Maybe I'll go back to, ESO or BDO or Guild Wars 2, play that for like a week, remember why I left it to begin with. And, and then there we go. They've all transitioned over to gacha games, interestingly enough, or console games, which are, I've actually noticed though. So back in, the mid-late 2000s, there were a lot of carbon copy MMOs. There was like Flife, Fiesta, Eden Eternal, Grand Fantasia, Florentia, all these really basic yet still entertaining to an extent anime MMOs, and they were releasing every like other month. Every year there were dozens of MMOs that were releasing, which was, is considered the golden age of MMOs, the 2000s. Yeah. So, I mean, what I've noticed in the 2020s at least is that while MMOs aren't really being developed to the same, I guess they're not being developed as frequently as they once were, survival games and multiplayer games have seen a significant increase in popularity.
Yes.
Valheim, V-Rising, like this is a genre that has existed for decades, yet at the same time never really found the success that they did until the 2020s. And all of the friends and the people I know that played MMOs have been having an absolute blast in these survival games. So that's where I've
noticed that too. I have definitely noticed that too, with myself as well. Now, V-Rising was one that I never got a chance to play. I was just way too busy at the time. But like Valheim, Ark, when it first launched, and with some of the subsequent updates, survival games have definitely got more interesting. And I think I know the reason for that. I was talking to someone about this recently. The whole landscape has changed now that live streaming is a thing, right? And if you look at it, an MMO is not a fun experience for both the live streamer and the audience, within limits, I guess. Whereas a survival game really is.
Well, like watching a streamer stream an MMO, unless it's a new MMO. So watching a streamer, you go to the Final Fantasy category on Twitch, you go to the WoW category on Twitch, and there are two kinds of streamers that are being watched. There's the kind of streamer that's pushing competitive PvE content, so doing the hardcore raids.
Top of the brackets,
Yeah, exactly. They're like the top 0.1% that you want to watch because you can't do that yourself. Then there is the category where people are pushing the most competitive PvP. And it's the same logic behind it. They can't compete at that level, and they want to see their favorite PvPer stomp the other, PvPer. So they're the two categories that are typically found in terms of MMO streams. But survival streamers or people that are streaming survival games, completely different feel behind the streams, completely different kind of content.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I have streamed both. My streams don't ever follow a format. It's like whatever happens when I get on for the day, that's what's happening. It might be an MMO, it might be survival game, it might just be sitting and chatting nonsense and watching some videos. But I have noticed that survival is a much easier genre to stream while being interactive with your chat, because you don't have the general feeling that people are trying to critique stuff as much like they would in an MMO. It's more just we're just hanging out, chatting, and there's kind of just something on the screen in the background, you know, like Valheim, I'm building a house or whatever. And it makes it easier to interact with the chat on a non-game relevant level. With MMOs, you're normally interacting with your chat based on the MMO itself, you know, what's particularly or specifically happening at that moment in time. It's kind of like a running commentary. At least I noticed that with a lot of people, like you say, with the PvP or the high-end PvE. You're more focused, the game is the focus, where with survival games, a lot of the streamers can just chat about absolute nonsense while streaming, you know, do some streamer interactivity, and that's just like a backdrop for the stream. And I think that's shown a rise in popularity because of that. And again, I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact that a lot of MMOs that are coming out now are very, like you said, cookie cutter. They're very copy paste, and they're very formulaic. They all follow something very similar to each other, which I wanted to ask you this actually. What do you think the last MMO you played was that gripped you because it was just so different?
World of Warcraft back in 2008. So it's been 15 years since I've actually really been enthralled by an MMO. I've played MMOs that have been fun. I played Guild Wars 2, that was fun. Yeah. But it didn't do anything new. Like, yeah, there's a narrative. Yeah, there's a hybrid combat system. Yeah, there's a large segregated world. But I mean, I played Guild Wars 2 in WoW. WoW did it better. And I know that's going to be a contentious opinion to have. And I'm going to piss some people off, but Guild Wars 2...
I agree with you.
And then Final Fantasy 14, I played that. Final Fantasy 14, you know, looked really good, had a really good narrative, had turn-based combat, had a big world to explore. Well, WoW already did that. So I'm literally just playing WoW again with a new skin.
Yeah, exactly. They're all kind of apples from the same tree. They all do things slightly different, but at the end of the day, they are all from the same base template. And that's okay if you are specifically a fan of Final Fantasy. You're going to prefer that to WoW. I'm not going to try to say you'll prefer WoW, you will prefer Final Fantasy. But I kind of agree with you that WoW was the big one, right? Mainly because it was most people's first big MMO. There has been one game since that I have played, like an MMO, that initially I was enthralled with. You couldn't pull me away from it until I hit well, I'll see if you can guess what the issue I hit was, because you've probably played this game. Arcade.
Oh.
Arcade, before it had a full UK release or full, you know, Western release, when it was Korean and you had to play it with Korean. I remember watching Yogscast back when they were massive. I used to watch them all the time, and they were playing this Korean MMO that was just different. It was just built different. And watching them, you know, go through and try and guess the options based on whatever the highlight background of a button color was, you know, like green or red, just guessing what it was and finding their way through, building a galleon ship and everything. I was like, hold up, I'm going to do anything I can to play this. So I got the, I think it was off 4chan at the time. You could get like a translation pack, and it was rubbish. Like, it was a terrible translation pack from Korean to English just to be able to play on the Korean servers. And it was me, my girlfriend, and like 3 other friends. We sat playing this for months. And it is, I think what made me realize that this was a fantastic MMO in concept is at no point did I Google the quickest way to get to max level. We just adventured off, got lost in the world, you know, traveling across actual scale oceans to islands. And then I found out that a system existed in the game that as soon as you realize it exists, you're just like, I am done with this.
The stamina system?
It wasn't called stamina. It was labor points.
Yeah, but that's more or less the same thing. You're limited to how much you can do based off of how many labor points you have.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you can mine 500 ore today, and that's it. You want to play more than that? Go find someone else to do. And it's like, but
there was actually a VIP system that was implemented in there that you could pay for.
Yeah.
They expanded the amount of labor points you could have. So
see, that is the very reason I stopped playing. Because the way I looked at it is, right, I'm paying to play this game, and then I need to pay more to play it more, right? It's a horrible, and the the sad thing is, in the Eastern world, this is standard. Like, these sort of practices in gaming are completely normal. Like, Korean games do this all the time.
So do Chinese games.
Yep, Chinese games, you name it, they all do it. And to them, it's really normal. So when a game like that comes over to us, who have never had to experience anything like that, at least me, with that being my first non-Western game, right? I was like, you are onto an incredible game here. Like, the foundations of this game, having a 3-class hybrid system, all of this is incredible. Rideable mounts that you can shoot arrows off the back of. You've done everything that I wanted from WoW. Like, if you'd asked me, what do you want WoW 2 to be? Arcade was it. And then I find out about that system, and I was like, yeah, no, this ain't it, Chief. This ain't it. And that was, for me, that was the quit moment. Because it's like, I want a game that I can truly immerse myself in, and not just get to a point where, you know, like Daddy Blizzard drops in from the sky, and they're like, are you ready to swipe that card, son? And it's like, no, I'm just gonna... I think I'm gonna go back to RuneScape. Even though it's nothing like it. It's, yeah, it's different strokes for different folks, I guess.
And it's sad because there are some MMOs out there that really did do things, like individual things, to stand out. Ion, as an example, was touted as, I think it was one of the OG WoW killers. You know, it had really good tab target combat. It had a great focus on open world PvP. There was the Abyss. I don't know if you played Ion, but there was. I
didn't play it, but I saw a lot of it. Yeah.
Each individual zone had open world PvP, and you could so there are these portals that open up in the sky and allow for the other faction to fly through. And so you could be like level 15 and you're questing with your friend, and you're in the, you know, the Ilios zone, and you know, there are no opposing faction there, no Asmodeans there, so you're just like, you're chilling, you're questing, you're having a good time. And then suddenly this portal opens up in the sky, and there are like 200 fucking Asmodeans that are level 60 flying through, and they just eviscerate everything on the map, and they camp you for hours and hours. And it is such a horrible experience, but then, like, that, you know,
it's memorable.
Yeah, exactly. It left an impression on you, and then you become one of those guys later on. You know, there become raid parties, and you go around trying to raid other towns, other cities, other faction capitals, and then there was like aerial, because you noted that there was mounted combat in Arcade. There was actually aerial combat in Ion. So in Ion, there was a flight feature, and that was one of the older games that implemented flight as a feature. And as opposed to like WoW, where you could just like fly, and in Final Fantasy 14 where you could just fly and use that as another means of travel, in Ion you could fly, but you could kill people while up in the sky. So you could shoot people, you know, charge at them, stun them, CC them, and just, that was something that hadn't really been done at that point. So when I saw that, I was like, shit, this is awesome. Like, this
is the next big thing, but then they mess up everything else, and it's like, oh, well, maybe not yet.
Yeah.
No, I think you've brought up something there as well that's like a real big topic as well for this kind of nostalgia rose-tinted glasses argument, where people say, oh, MMOs have gotten easy. And I agree to a certain extent. I don't think they've gotten easy. I think they've tried to take away adversity in games. Like, some of the most memorable moments in MMO history have been overcoming some sort of adversity. Like World of Warcraft. When someone says Taran Mill to you, you've got horror flashbacks of Horde and Alliance clashing at the bridge and having hour-long battles to be able to cross the bridge, right?
Or Alterac
and you
Valley.
Look at that. Yeah, Alterac Valley. All of these things that weren't instance zones. They were just choke points in the world that became natural PvP zones. And people say, oh, but that was horrible having to, you know, I bet that was awful having to wait 2 hours to get into the zone next to you. No, you just went and did something else, or you joined in with the fight, right? And once you overcome this adversity, you feel epic, right? It's an absolutely epic moment that you will tell your friends about. You don't get that anymore. You really don't get that. They've kind of, most modern MMOs have gone with this thing of everybody should be legendary. Everybody should be super. It's the whole, if everyone's super, no one's super, right? Look at how World of Warcraft changed with their legendaries. Those were things that you had to be dedicated to get legendary weapons. You saw someone with the God, what was it? Illidan's scythes, the warglaives.
Oh yeah.
MVP. Like, you'd see that guy walking through Stormwind and you knew who he was. Just from the warglaives and like maybe whatever chestplate he'd got on, you knew who that was. And so you'd have some actual like legendary people in the game that you just knew. I don't know the last MMO where that was a thing, where you'd overcome actual adversity, and it wasn't everybody overcomes this adversity. They couldn't. You can't have everybody beat everybody. Not everyone can be at the top in those regards. And I think that's one thing that's missing from MMOs, where just that kind of status is missing now. Everyone's just on equal footing at a glance, right?
So you noted that people think MMOs have gotten too easy when they haven't. I think it's also due to the fact that studios, developers, they have this weird shift in focus where now they're more interested in making MMOs more single player friendly. So yes. Final Fantasy XIV, as of I think it was Shadowbringers, they implemented the first incarnation of the NPC party system, which allowed for you to queue for dungeons with the NPCs that were a part of the your group of scions. You could queue with you didn't need to queue with other people. You could queue with one of like 8 different characters that would fill one of the designated roles: tank, support, and then fill out the rest with DPS. So you never have to queue with another person. You never have to play with another person. Then Endwalker came out, the most recent expansion. They expanded the NPC party system to Endwalker, and then they're kind of going back with each expansion and making the party system compatible with old expansions. So new players that come into the game don't need to party for the old content or queue for parties with the old content.
It's not dead content anymore.
It's all just like everyone is just playing a single player game with other people around them.
Yeah. So, That's actually a really interesting point, because I was watching a video recently about old school RuneScape that this all just kind of clicked with me. Old school RuneScape's only group content is at the very, very late in. Like, we're talking 800 to 2,000 hours into the game. That's where the group content kind of starts. You know, the mandatory, not mandatory, but almost mandatory group content. Until that point, you are playing a solo RPG in the same world as other people. And I think that is one of the reasons that it did so well. Whether you had friends or not, or whether you wanted to make friends in game or not, there was something to do that was meaningful solo. And I think a lot of MMOs that relied heavily on multiplayer stuff are now trying to retroactively move to a single player model. But the problem is the way that they have built their game was directly tied to multiplayer. And they're trying to retrofit bits now that don't really work. I mean, this is a hot topic where people talk about level scaling, gear scaling, and all that sort of stuff. And like you said, the NPC party fill. They're kind of band-aid fixing problems where that problem should just be removed rather than band-aided, right? So, for example, I get into heated debates over this quite a lot. I will not play a game that level scales. And people are like, why? You can play with everyone. And I'm like, right, okay, so what is the incentive for me to reach max level? Oh, because you'll be at max level. Right, but if I can now play with a level 1 player and they either scale up or I scale down, what's the point?
Yeah, there's no sense of accomplishment.
No, and they're like, oh, but you've got new abilities. Cool, but they've also been scaled down as well, so why am I unlocking them?
Or in the case of Final Fantasy XIV, you actually have your abilities removed and scaled down to the point you are. So if you're scaled down to a level 24 zone or 24 dungeon, you only have the abilities that you would have had at 24. Yeah,
same with WoW time walking. And maybe this is because a lot of players haven't come from playing RuneScape, where this was kind of the default thing, right? The whole point of leveling up in RuneScape is that, let's say you want to kill these demons and try and farm them for gold for, to do something else. Well, you want to level up so that you can kill more demons more efficiently, and that is your reward for leveling up. Now imagine you level up from the recommended level of 90 to level 100, and the game still treats you as a level 90, or they treat the creature as a level 100. The entire point of you doing that task has been removed. So your reward essentially has been removed. And I think a lot of people don't see it that way, because WoW started doing this in Pandaria, where you can now play with a level 91 or a level 100 in the same dungeon. And you see, let's say you're a level 90 and I'm a level 100. You see yourself doing low damage and you see me doing low damage. But I see both of us doing high damage almost on par with each other. While we're represented as different levels, the game is actually treating us both as level 95s. They've met us in the middle. And when you start to realize that, and the illusion falls apart, you ask yourself, now, what is leveling in a game? It's just a progress bar from level 1 to level whatever the max level is, 100. It's basically a loading or progress bar to the end game. You are not allowed to do the end game until you've done all this meaningless stuff for hours and hours on end. And I think a lot of people, when they realize that, that's kind of the quit moment in a lot of MMOs. They realize they're running on this treadmill that's going nowhere, and that's it.
Which is interesting because Guild Wars 2 is literally built upon that as a foundation. Every zone, it sets a minimum and maximum bar of level. So when entering, you cannot exist in that zone above 25, or you cannot exist in this zone above 50. Yet it's also regarded by the Guild Wars 2 community. I don't know about outside of the Guild Wars 2 community, but in the Guild Wars 2 community is one of the features that they are most proud of and that they are most happy with. So it's very interesting that, that there's such a strong contrasting difference of opinions between that.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely multiple sub-audiences within MMOs, right? I think it mostly depends on how much time you have. You know, on a weekly basis, how much time do you have to put into a game? So there's a lot of dials and variables when it comes to the type of player. How much do you want a game to respect your time? Are you willing to have them not respect your time at the cost of opening your wallet every couple of days or once or twice a week? So there are definitely different audiences that fall into different categories in MMOs. And I think the audience that have stuck playing RuneScape, old school RuneScape or WoW Classic, are the OG players. And that's not to be elitist. I think it's just kind of a matter of fact, right? They want pure MMOs. They want this linear or curve-like progression where the time they put in, they feel that time is respected and that it equates to something. You know, that they can disappear for a week, come back, and someone who started a week ago hasn't now completely progressed past them. Which is difficult in modern MMOs because the end game doesn't stay end game for long enough to be relevant in any meaningful way. You know, you've got the next patch that's coming out, the next raid tier, the next expansion. If you disappear for a month and come back, the end content isn't end content anymore. A lot of MMOs are so focused on vertical progression that they kind of forget to take a step back, take a breather, and realize that horizontal progression is also fun. You know, it doesn't always have to be about making number go up, which, like in Guild Wars, if you took away the vanity number that's applied to a player's power level, there isn't really a value there that matters. It's all kind of arbitrary. That's where I think the biggest divide in MMO user base is. Some people just want a easily calculatable, if I get this, I will be this much better. And there are others that are like, I don't really care about leveling. And I think the best solution to that would be not level scaling, but just finding a way to remove level as an indicator at all, which is, I guess, easier said than done when you're so ingrained in a genre that is all about number go up.
Oh yeah, and it's not just MMOs. The entire RPG genre is based around levels. Like,
yes.
You know, at level 5 you're this strong, and you have these statistics. At level 8 you're this strong and have this increase in statistics every time you level. You see your numbers go up. Now I can fight that enemy over there. Now that boss monster is no longer, gonna one-shot me. I might actually stand a chance against that guy. Yeah. And interestingly, mobile MMOs actually. So we're talking about how players are divided between two types of players. There's one player that doesn't have much time to actually play games. I think mobile MMOs specifically target that demographic of player because mobile MMOs allow for a lot of autoplay. They allow for a lot of auto activities to exist within the game. So it's essentially you pull up your phone, you log into the game, and you just let it go off on the side. Yeah. But then when you go back into the game, whether it be later in the day, later in the week, or later in the month to actually play the game, you see this mass difference in terms of your power because it's been playing on its own and it doesn't require really any kind of time investment whatsoever. I think mobile MMOs are really tapping into that audience, and interestingly, as much as I don't want to admit it, mobile MMOs are becoming more and more popular while actually remaining equally as bad as they were a couple years ago. They're not really innovating. They're not really introducing anything different because I've played 5 cross-platform MMOs over the last year, and all 5 of them are the same autoplay, the same gotcha, pay to win, bare bones narrative, no world to explore, horrible voice acting, And it's just
Yeah, I know what you mean. I have tried some MMOs on mobile, and you are right. They've not changed that much. Just maybe graphically.
oh yeah.
But mechanically, God no. They're just, it's more of the same. But talking about more of the same in mobile games, I don't know if you knew this, but the Scars of Honor that we were talking about, which you're going to get to see some, like, I don't know if we're allowed to announce it, so I won't, but you're going to get to see some cool stuff with that game soon. But I got flown out about 5-6 months ago while they were working on their first build of the mobile version of the MMO. Now, there's something really exciting about this, that we've seen like Black Desert Online and other high-profile MMOs release mobile versions.
Well, not version, it was an entirely different game.
Yes, and so this is what I was going to say. You know, you're in a separate game world, and it's nothing to do. You can't. It's not like you log out of your PC and you log in on the phone and you continue. No. Scars of Honor have done something that I'm super, super impressed with, because I got to test it on the last day I was there, because they just got together a build for Android. And they're like, come check this out. You are playing in the same active game world on mobile or PC, and it was designed from day one to be compatible with both interfaces, right? With touch interface, controller on the phone, I believe. Whatever you want to use, it's compatible. Which, I think this is going to bridge a gap between the two communities we just spoke about. You've got the community that want, put it in your pocket, forget it for a week, and I come back and wow, I'm level 100 or something. This isn't one of those games. This is, you actively play it, but you can play it between devices. And a few people have said to me, they're like, yeah, but that wouldn't work. Nobody will do that. Old school RuneScape, case in point, right? You can log into the same accounts in the same game worlds, play cross-play between mobile and desktop. And I've seen people even playing on like a Steam Deck and whatnot now. You know, they've found more creative ways to play. And that's the way they daily drive that game. You know, they'll be sat in the office doing a bit of low-click intensity gaming, such as fishing in RuneScape, on their phone, at work. Maybe click once or twice a minute, and then they'll get home and they'll be going into like 5-man Chambers of Xeric raids, you know, real high click intensity with the same people. And I think a more modern MMO adopting this strategy of you are all in the same game world and your progress is meaningful and it's not diminished by, you know, running in the background, which a lot of people don't like. I think this could bridge the gap between those two communities quite well.
See, RuneScape and Albion Online also did this, because Albion Online released a mobile version of the game too.
They did, yes.
They're both RuneScape and Albion Online released mobile versions of the game, so they were built as PC games and then built at a later date as a mobile. Yes. And so I guess Scars of Honor being built, I think, and this is the same with Genshin Impact, being built as a PC game, but then also being built as a mobile game, and being built as a console game, as opposed to just having one designed and released as an afterthought at a later date, provides a much better experience, I think, for the user, the player. And building a game with every platform in mind, as opposed to building it for a platform at a later date, provides just a better game in terms of quality overall. So,
100%. I mean, I can tell you this as somebody who has... I've worked on PC apps in the past for other companies, and then it's come to the mobile, you know, app landscape's kicking off now. We need to get this working on Android, and I'm like, no problem. Turns out pretty big problem, but back when this, you know, when the app landscape really kicked off and everyone was porting their stuff to it, the tools were there for it. But then you're like, if I had have made this UI decision now, when I have both, you know, PC and mobile in front of me, I would not have made this choice, because it doesn't work with both. And you find this with a lot of games. I mean, RuneScape is so old and like archaic at this point. They could basically run it in an Android emulator, and that's how it became something that you could run on mobile, although it wasn't planned to. It's such an old game that it takes no resources to run it on mobile. So adapting that was all just right. We need to redo the whole UI, and that's about it. Whereas with an actual MMO, you've got things like, our mesh is a really high poly count. How do we scale those down? Can we scale those down? Does that break something else? Oh, great, all the shaders are broken now. And you can never test the whole MMO before you've ported it to another thing. That's why they're broken on release, a lot of them. So doing this from day one, I'm really excited to see how that works, to see what content people gravitate towards on both platforms. Because, I mean, people will always bring up the argument, high-end PvP. You can't do high-end PvP on mobile. And it's like, you would be surprised. Like, playing RuneScape, I raided doing some really high-end content, only to find out that one of the people I'm raiding with is playing off, like, a Galaxy S20. And I'm like, how? Like, I could not do the things you're doing. He's like, I just played it on mobile from the start. I've just got really good at using the mobile controls. So it will be interesting to see what sort of activities people gravitate towards, whether it's like skilling or something like that, or social on the mobile, and then, you know, they proper gear themselves up, headsets on, to get on the PC, and then go like high-end PVM or PvP. That will be really interesting.
With indie MMOs being where they are right now, with mobile MMOs being where they are right now, and the stagnant state of the genre, because let's be honest here, it is in a pretty stagnant state. There hasn't really been a big release in years. I think the last big release was Lost Ark, and that was what, a year or two ago, but Lost Ark had already been out for several years in Korea at that point. And
exactly.
Like, what? We're promised Ashes of Creation in 2028 or 2029, the Riot MMO sometime after 2030, Blue Protocol maybe some point in 2024, Throne and Liberty, and like, there we go. We have a handful of MMOs coming out of the next decade. So like, you compare that to any other decade after the 90s, and it's like, yeah, the genre is stagnant. So with all the different, you know, subcategories of MMOs that are coming out, or the platforms rather, where do you think the genre is going? Like, what do you think of the future of the genre right now?
This is going to sound negative, but I actually mean this in a positive way. I think the genre is going to go backwards. And because of exactly what you've just mentioned. You've mentioned 4 titles that are going to be releasing in, what's, 5, 6, 7 years. No one cares. Like, they care now, and they will care when it comes out. But up until then, people just don't really care. It's pie in the sky. It's a pipe dream, right? What people want is... Do you remember the days when a game used to just come out and you didn't know this game was even being made? When's the last time that happened and someone just said, oh, bro, here's a fantastic game, enjoy it? It's all been hype recently.
Mobile MMOs.
Mobile, yeah.
Wait, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, where's this come from?
Okay, there we go.
There's a reason. So, from my experience, a lot of games over the last 30 years have used a very similar kind of development and art pipeline. You know, the tools that you're using for 3D modeling have remained very similar. The tools you've used for texturing remain very similar. Same with programming and game engines. The last 15 years, and I was talking to some people that I work with in the gaming industry about this, and they were like, dude, we were talking about this literally the other week. The pipeline has changed so much on a not even a yearly basis at this point. Like, we were talking about, oh god, what was it called? The sculpting tool. I've already forgot the name of it. You know, this was the next big thing. You'd sculpt with ZBrush, that was it. ZBrush was the main part of the modeling pipeline. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to, you know, this is going to be a relevant skill taught in uni that's going to last you a lifetime. Like, it doesn't get much better than this. My friend comes out of, you know, doing 3D modeling in uni, and within 7 months, nobody's using that version of ZBrush, along with, like, I can't remember the tool name, begins with M, but it was Megascans, actually, before Epic Games bought it out. Working with all that, and Marmoset set, and all this sort of stuff. There were all these tools that were touted as being the standard. Their skills are irrelevant a year after leaving uni. So these games are taking a lot longer to make, because now they're having to bring people in who have no idea about the development pipeline, because, you know, they left college or uni 3 months ago, and all that information doesn't even matter now. Like, we're not using Houdini anymore. Put that to one side. Forget about it. We may use it like a few years down the line. And they're like, okay, so what are we using? Cool. So here's the thing, ChatGPT, and like all these other new tools. And they're like, right, so you need to learn to use these now. So learning is now part of the process. And then halfway through the development of an MMO, the new people that they're bringing in from universities have got skills that are nothing to do with the MMO that are being developed. So it's like, great, now we've got to retrain all you on this. And it's kind of strange, because you could now, at this point, just skip the whole hiring people who've left uni for the relevant thing. Just get a random artist or programmer and just teach them from the ground up. And a lot of them have been saying this. Like, it's terrifying how fast a skill set becomes irrelevant in a single cycle of a game's life cycle. And if you look at things like, a perfect example, Ashes of Creation. Now, They have gone through 4 versions of Unreal Engine in just the last 3 years. If you understood the monumental task of changing game engine, even with the same game engine, just to a newer version, because I can tell you this, it's a clusterfuck. You want no part in dealing with that. You get some new features like, oh, you can now have infinite polys on your foliage because of nanite foliage. Great. By the way, your landscape tool that you used, that's broken now. So have fun with that one. And then you're redeveloping that. You're trying to play catch up before the game's even released. It's terrifying. So I think games are going to go backwards. They're going to go for the lower poly, easier on the eyes art style, or the, as people say, the WoW/Fortnite art style, because it's easy to maintain and it's timeless. Both games have shown that. It really is timeless. So you're not playing catch up. You pick an engine that can do the things that you know that you're going to need, and you just work with it. Same tool set, Get someone who knows Photoshop, or Photoshop and has a graphic tablet. Cool. That's the pipeline for this. You're sorted. You don't need someone to come in and make normal maps to fake geometry. It's low geometry. You've got the geometry you need. So I do think they will go backwards and just stick to an older workflow eventually, because it's the only way they're ever going to release.
Interestingly, the East, so Asia, Korea, China, they're actually obsessed with the absolute opposite. The West likes making games that utilize that whole WoW look and feel, the aesthetic.
The nostalgia, yeah.
But the East, they are constantly pushing out the most beautiful games imaginable, but that is all they are. They lack any kind of depth, any kind of substance whatsoever. They're just a pretty game with pretty models and absolutely nothing else.
Absolutely. I noticed this with Black Desert. I was so hyped for that. I saw this like, wow, I'm basically 3D modeling my character. Like, I want my cheekbones to be there. Cool. I can make exactly me in the game. And then I get in and I'm like, wow, this is a very shallow game. Some people love it and I get why, but in comparison to the sort of games I would play, it was really shallow. And then I realized when I was like, okay, what's max level? And they're like, so about that.
Yeah, there is none.
And I'm like, so why is there a level at all? Like, why? And
so
they were
you
like,
can spend dozens of hours grinding that same monster.
Exactly. I was like, why don't you just have your power goes up rather than attributing a number to it when there's... And they're like, right, now this is where it gets more confusing, because there is a soft cap where it's realistically... And I'm like, oh my god, I don't care anymore. But you're right, a lot of the games are very shallow beyond the visuals. And I think the reason is to entice people in and then get them as quickly as possible to, getting the wallet out. I think Diablo Immortal, while not being specifically an MMO, falls into the same category, right? It was this gorgeous game with 40 minutes of just fantastic gameplay, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Get people invested in the game, and then as soon as you get to that 40-minute gameplay mark, you've just got so many pop-ups for microtransactions, this armor kit. Hey, your horse that you don't have yet? Do you want armor for that? I'm like, no, I don't. It's like, well, cool. Being as you don't have your horse, do you want to buy a horse now that you were going to get in 20 minutes for free so that you can use this free horse? I'm like, no, just stop. And for me, that's kind of a quit moment again. But that's kind of interesting because people say, oh, well, why do they force all these microtransactions on you in these good-looking games? It's just because they're whale simulators now, aren't they? They're actively trying to get you to bugger off, leave their game, because they don't want to have you as a network fee with whatever provider they're using. Like, you're an extra 2 gigs of data a month that's just being drained. Just pay up or get gone, which is, it's sad. But, a lot of these games now are shallow beyond the graphics until you pull that wallet out. It's unfortunate because they could be so much more. Imagine if we got these 2 different types of MMOs, the beautiful, beautifully modeled, Eastern games, mixed with the Western MMOs that have got just something to them, some substance to the gameplay, and smash them together. Oh my god, we'd have the best MMO.
Yeah, we'd finally have the WoW killer that we've been waiting for decades now. Yeah, I mean, and this is what Ashes of Creation is promising to be, right? A team of WoW developers that have come together and used the latest and greatest Unreal Engine 5 technology. And it seems like a great idea, but that's where I think we run into this infinite development cycle, that by the time they release something,
what they've released is now just kind of industry standard. Look at things like, God, what, the name of the game's completely escaped me. Not Starfield, the
Star Citizen?
Star Citizen, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, look at that. They're doing all these things that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I don't even know how long now that they announced it, was kind of revolutionary. But it doesn't matter if the game isn't released. By the time they reach the release window that they seem to think they'll reach, which apparently now is never, they said it's always going to be in development, which we knew that. But when they actually release something that's playable, that a player can look and go, okay, that I would call that a full game. By the time they do that, that's just standard for the industry. Other games like that are releasing in the same year window and whatnot. So that's another reason I think they're just going to start going backwards. Go back to the tried and tested art styles, the tried and tested gameplay loops, and just make them better rather than trying to invent a whole new genre that, quite frankly, nobody even knows if they want yet because they've not come out yet. It's kind of like with, I'm not going to get into the metaverse, but it's the same principle with that, right? In theory, if you've watched Ready Player One, oh my god, it's fantastic. The metaverse is really cool. If you've played any Oculus home games, you realise, Christ, why does anyone want to play this? But everyone's just pouring billions and billions into something that isn't tried and tested. So it'll be interesting to see where that sort of stuff goes.
It's interesting because Throne and Liberty, as an example here, is touting itself as being, this large, new, innovative game where they're like, it's a beautiful game with beautiful character models, and then you compare it to Black Desert, and you're like, well, we already have that. It's a large open world with, PvP zones with day and night cycles, and you're like, okay, so it's been done dozens of times before. We have these big, large-scale realm versus realm, world versus world, and you're like, okay, but the ESO, Guild Wars 2,
did that as well, yeah.
Yeah, they're all already doing that, and they're like, and then we have this really complex hybrid combat system, and you're like, there are a dozen MMOs that have hybrid combat systems. Okay, so what you're saying is there's nothing at all original in what you're developing. It's literally just something we already have that players are gonna be like, oh cool, yeah, this is pretty, this is fun, and within a week you're already gonna be leaving.
There's a saying that I don't normally abide by, but I think it is so true in the MMO market, which is you're only ever as good as the thing you're copying. Look at any game that has tried to be like a WoW clone. They're never going to be as good. They can only be as good as the thing they're copying, because people have said to me like, oh, I'm trying to, because I've got a company that does game consulting for like MMOs and just regular, single player games, multiplayer games, you name it. And the amount of people we've had come to us and be like, we're making something that whenever they say, essentially, think of it as, and it'll be like Roblox, but, and then they add something else on. They'll be like Roblox, but it'll be a bit more modern. And I'm like, okay, so why is someone going to choose to play Roblox over Roblox clone? And they'll be like, well, because it's more modern. And I'm like, right, okay, let's say I'm a Roblox player. All my friends and everyone I know and all the content I consume is all Roblox. I'm going to stick with Roblox rather than the empty clone that doesn't have any of that stuff. If you do something completely wild and different, well, then you've got a selling point to bring me over. And I think a lot of games have very different selling points that you need to not try and copy in your new MMO. And people have said to me when I've brought this up and I've mentioned RuneScape, well, what's RuneScape's selling point other than it being like a point-and-click used to be a browser game? Well, that's debunked now. The browser version's gone. You can't play the browser version anymore. So that's not its reason for people still playing it. What I think the original reason that people played RuneScape for was they made the game so simple to program for that they could bring a programmer in, teach them for 3 days how to program in RuneScript, their language, how to add new models in, and realistically, they couldn't physically break the game because they're constrained to this programming language that is unbreakable to a sense, right? They were adding new content quite literally every week. Every Wednesday, you would come home from school or college, and there would be an entire update that they didn't even tell you about. You just log in, and there's this new vast open area of the world with a new skill, with a new boss, with a new mini game every single week. And that is one of the reasons that RuneScape in particular has kind of got ahead of the game. They've got such a vast amount of content that nobody can keep up with that is meaningful, that's kind of an area that they've won now. I've never seen a game do anything similar.
Talking about content and the existing game versus clone and why you would transition over, that is, I think, one of the biggest issues that new MMOs have, when an MMO releases, right? So let's say Blue Protocol and Throne and Liberty are both launching in 2024. When they release, you're going to play it for a week, you're going to play it for a month, but eventually you hit the cap in terms of what you can do. So you hit level 50, you run the max level dungeons, you do the max level raids, and then you're done. So then people, like, what is the most common complaint at that point? There's not enough content, there isn't enough to do, there is no real end game. And then they compare it to games that do exist, that do have an end game, that do have years worth of content. Like, well, you know, Final Fantasy 14 has 8,000 hours worth of content. World of Warcraft has 20,000 hours worth of content. WoW has the ability to, you know, capture pets and duel them like Pokemon. You could run all these old raids and farm transmog. You know, there's PvP, open world, battlegrounds. There's like so much you can do, so many unique features. And Throne and Liberty doesn't really have anything. It's like, but that's because WoW has been around since like 2004 and has had 20 years worth of content updates to build the game into what it is now. So then people are just left saying this game is trash because there's absolutely nothing to do in it. And that happened with Lost Ark, that happened with PSO2 or PSO2 New Genesis, and that's one of the reasons why New Genesis never took off, because even now, like 2 years later, it's still playing catch up with all the other games, but it doesn't have much of a community left. So I think that is one of the main issues that every single MMO, including Ashes of Creation, including the Riot MMO, are going to run into, and that's a hurdle that I think is going to be very difficult to overcome.
Yeah, I think that this ties into a lot of the discussions we've been having just actually. Leveling plays a really big part in this, because by having an MMO that revolves around the leveling system so heavily, for example, World of Warcraft max level, let's just say level 100, for example, and then you've got someone who's not level 95. They're almost double the power. The level 100 is almost double the power of the level 95. So you've created a level-centric game. So anything below your level is pointless. You've got a good 90% of the game that, as soon as you reach max level, is pointless. Whereas when you take away this kind of like level-centric nature, or you elongate the levels, right? Let's say World of Warcraft, a level takes 20 minutes. If the benefit is that much greater, that next level, you're just going to spend that 20 minutes leveling up. You feel like you're wasting your time by not leveling up. And then you've got games like RuneScape, where gaining a level might take a day. You're not rushing to get that level because you can't. You're going to do the content at that level because it's actually more efficient to just do it. And you've got something to do at every level, and you're not rushing to the end game. Many people never ever reach max level in RuneScape. And that's okay. Like, it's not required. You as a level 40 and me as a level 55 can quite comfortably go and do a boss together. Yeah, you're going to be slightly weaker than me, but we can still do stuff together. And it doesn't alienate the player base between max and starting, right? Max level and starting the game. Because normally, if you and a friend level separately in WoW, there's no chance you're doing anything together. Mm-hmm. It'll just be like, bro, I'll see you at max level, and we'll go do dungeons and raids, right? I think that's really unhealthy for a game that is all about the multiplayer aspect, right? If you are limited to playing with someone who's within 1 or 2 levels of you, that's actually limiting you to someone who's played within 20 to 40 minutes of total play time of you. How wild is that when you look at it from that perspective?
Which is also one of the reasons why survival games are so popular, because there isn't necessarily, like, you can log out, log back in, and your friend might have, built an extension to your house. They might have built, like a campfire. They might have like farmed a few materials to upgrade their gear or something. But you're still like, okay, well, now I'm logged in. Let's go out and do something.
In fact, you've hit the nail on the head with that. Me and some friends recently started a Minecraft Bedrock world that we were playing together. Like loads of friends that normally meet up at conventions and whatnot. And this was just a way to just have a few beers on a night and chill, So we'd have them hopping on. And like you say, I've got a farm built with an extension to my house and whatnot. And I think what players crave about these worlds is the persistence, right? And this was the biggest selling point to me way back in the day. When I first started playing MMOs, this was the bit that blew my mind. The fact that, because I'd always be like, how do I save the game? And saying that now, people will laugh at you. How do I save the game? The idea of a persistent world and a persistent game didn't exist on that scale. So you'd go and play RuneScape, you'd go and play World of Warcraft, and when you realize, wait, I don't need to save. I go and do something else, close the PC down, come back tomorrow. Everything's still there, but more. Like, my friend's gone and done this stuff, and he's found a cave with with all these dragons and stuff, and he's going to show me it and show me where he got this cool thing. Like, that element of MMOs, I feel, has slowly been optimized out of them. The persistence is relative to you via instancing, and while I understand why instancing exists, that persistence was a big selling point that I think a lot of people just don't see anymore.
Also, the sense of wonder, because that's pretty much what you just explained there, you know, with the whole, oh, there's a cave full of dragons, there might be something really cool beyond that. By removing that, like, I feel like the sense of wonderment from MMOs is no longer there. You know, you're just thrown into like a new area, a new expansion, and then like, what is your goal? Your goal is to just quickly move to the next quest hub, to take that quest. It'll tell you to kill, you know, 15 boars, loot 12 flowers, go back, quickly skip the text because it's unimportant, because you need to push towards hub B to get to hub C to keep up with the other people that are pushing to hub B and hub C. Otherwise, you're gonna fall behind.
You've actually nailed a point that I was trying to make a minute ago about if the goal is to get to the highest level, everything in between becomes irrelevant. And RuneScape again does it different. Because this is one of my favorite examples to bring up. They're like, oh, so what's the high level zones and what's the low level zones? And I'm like, well, there isn't. You can go to a zone, there is high tier content, mid tier content, and beginner content in that zone. Yeah, but okay, but so are they sent there first? No, you can go where you want. Like, there is no zone that becomes irrelevant. Something that I think is really immersive in RuneScape and games that do things like that, you will be doing skills or quests as a low-level player. And there'll be a high-level player in there, not just roaming around or flexing, but actually playing the game too. You're not being segregated out into zones and being told you should aspire to that. You're all just playing in a completely unleveled zone.
Which was actually very prominent in old JRPGs as well, old Final Fantasy games, old Tales of games. You'd go out into the overworld, you'd start farming some monsters, and then you're like, oh, that area looks kind of interesting. You'd go over there and you'd be fighting level 8 monsters, and then, you know, you'd immediately trigger an encounter and
get your ass handed to you.
35, and you're like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and apparently the reason that they started removing that is because players don't like dying.
Why?
So games have recently been kind of engineered to prevent you dying because they want you to feel like you've done a good job, right? And the easiest way to do that is to handhold you and physically stop you doing content that is higher level than you. Look at WoW. WoW slowly started adding in not level recommendations for their dungeons, hard level requirements. If you are not level 20, you cannot enter this dungeon. And the only reason is they want you to have an incredibly tailored experience. Whereas other games, and again, I'll use RuneScape as an example that I know that everyone will remember, getting the fire cape from the fight caves. The recommended level for that was level 85 to 100. And it became a community challenge because you could enter that at minimum level. Level 3, you could walk in there. You will probably get your ass handed to you, like, within the first 10 seconds. But it became a community challenge. What's the lowest combat level that we can get with this fire cape? And it just became something really cool. So you'd see a level 40 with, like, this fire cape on. You'd be like, what the hell? How? And people would say, oh, yeah, but it's too high stats to give to a level 30 or a level 40. And you're like, no, he's earned that. Like, he fully deserves to have that item. But they're scared of players going into that experience and dying over and over and over, and it becoming a quit moment. They want to remove the chance of a quit moment from their game. But by doing that, they remove a lot of the self-made player fun. And now they have to make tailored, exact experiences for every level possible, and they're not going to do that. They're just going to be like, guys, just rush to the end level, and that's where all your cool stuff's going to be.
That's player mentality anyway.
Exactly. I think it's not only is it player mentality, but I think it's kind of being bred into new players. That will hold your hand, will get you to the end game, and that's where you have to have the fun. And that's where you want to be, right? Forget all the other stuff. That's boring. Even though we've made it, like, that's boring. You don't want to deal with that. And I think it really devalues the amount of content that an MMO can have, because that content needs to exist as a means to get to the end game, but you are also forcing the players through it. I mean, look at games like WoW and pretty much every other game now that are offering level skips. You pay to play the game, and then you are basically expected to pay a further $30 to skip the game you've just bought, because even they know it's meaningless, and that you probably won't care about it. Where the actual solution is make the game good and make it relevant for a longer period of time. I think a lot of modern MMO players would hear make leveling longer and just think, oh god, no, worst thing ever. But if the leveling is the gameplay and your experiences in that world are while you level, it's not so bad. You're getting the same experience, but you're not being forced to do 30, 40, 50 hours of nonsense before you get to play that. So I think MMOs need to definitely rethink the approach with that.